And to begin with, I need to tell you a little story, and it's a traditional tale, and I'm sure it won't be new to some of you. You probably have heard it before, but I think it's helpful for kind of giving us a bit of direction as to where we're headed throughout the next 3 weeks as we look through Genesis. And it's the story about the blind men and the elephant. Has anyone heard this story before about blind men and the elephant? No? Yeah, some of you. So it's a traditional tale. I think it originates in India, somewhere a long way away. And basically, there's this group of blind men. There's a few of them. They stick together. They're like a team. And they hear that a creature, an animal, has arrived in their village, and it's called an elephant. But of course, they're blind, so they can't just go and see the elephant, but they decide, let's go and see if we can kind of feel this elephant and see if we can work out from touch what it's like. So the group of blind men travel to the village and they find the elephant. And sure enough, there it is an actual elephant, but of course they can't see it. And when they get to the elephant, of course, an elephant is a big creature and a man is a smaller creature relatively. So they're all stood kind of at different points along the side of the elephant. And so when they reach out to touch the elephant, they're all touching different parts of the elephant, and they're all explaining to each other what the elephant is like. And so the first person, he stood right at the front end of the elephant, and he reaches out and he grabs the elephant's trunk. And he says, this elephant, it's like a thick, strong snake. And the next blind man is stood a bit further along, and he's put his hands out and he's grabbed the elephant's ear. And he says, no, it's not like a snake. It's like a big fan, kind of big elephant ear fan. And the next man along is blind, of course, and he's put his hands out and he feels the elephant's leg. And he says, no, it's not like a fan, nor is it like a snake. It's like a big tree trunk. I can put my whole arms around it. And the next man is stood next to the side of the elephant, and he puts his hands out and he says, no, it's not like a tree trunk or a fan or a snake. It's like a big wall, because he's touching the belly of the elephant, and it's in front of him, and it takes up all the available space that he can touch. And then at the far end, there's another man, and he grabs the tail, and he says, no, it's not like a wall or a tree trunk or a snake. It's like a rope, because he's just got the tail of the elephant, and that's what it feels like to him. And so they're all describing truths about what this elephant is like, but they're all describing them from their own perspective, and their own perspective is limited. So nothing that they've said is incorrect. It's just that it doesn't paint the whole picture. And sometimes the story ends with some sighted person coming along and explaining that, and other times the story ends with all the blind men getting so cross with each other because they all think they're lying to each other, they have a fight. It has different endings depending on who's telling it, but I'm going to end it there. And of course, all of the blind men are partially correct. They're all describing a bit of this elephant, but none of them experience the whole truth. And this story is often used as a kind of explanation about religious faith, and people will say, well, it's effectively all the same thing. You're just all seeing it from a slightly different perspective, and so it appears to be different depending on whether you're a Christian or a Sikh or a Hindu or a Muslim. It's basically all the same thing. Now, Christians will contend that there is such a thing as absolute truth. There is a God. There are not multiple gods. There is only one true living God. There are not kind of multiple correct versions of God. There is only one true definition of God. But in order to fully grasp the truth of who God is, we have to step away from the idea that we can understand it from our own perspective. I think one thing that all people would agree on is that God is different from us. He is totally other from us. And so in order to understand who God really is, we need to let go of the idea that we can fully understand him just from our own experience. We need instead to seek to understand the reality as it really is. And that's why I've chosen to spend a bit of time in Genesis, and this week just on Genesis 1 verse 1, because I think it kind of paints a picture which is a very helpful starting point for this kind of discussion. And in a society which refuses to recognize the reality and which seems to be drifting further and further away from a Christian worldview, it can be difficult for Christians to stand our ground in an argument, in a conversation with someone else with a different perspective. We're so used to being battered with other worldviews that it can often be difficult to say, no, actually, I believe in the God of the Bible. Let me tell you why. But I want to spend some time thinking about the difference that it might make if we were to fully grasp what Genesis is saying, what difference that makes to our lives, to our experience of the world and the universe. When you think about your daily life, when you wake up, when you have breakfast, when you go to work or work in a home or whatever it is that you get up to regularly, what difference does it make to you that you believe that the universe and everything in it was created by God? And that it wasn't just created by him and left to run its course, it is actively sustained by God, who is creator and sustainer of all. Is that even something that you're regularly conscious of? I can be honest in this building. I know for me it's not. I don't spend any time generally thinking about the fact that God made something. When I'm eating my breakfast, I'm not actively thinking God created this thing for me to eat. We've read through Genesis. We see that God gives Adam and Eve all the plants, all the vegetables for food. There is a reality about the way that God created what he created, that he created it for us to enjoy, that's held in this story of creation in Genesis. And actually, if we were to comprehend it more, were we to think about it more, were we to dwell on it more, I think our lives would be all the richer for it. And the main truth really is this verse, Genesis 1 verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And so we're going to take it in three parts. In the beginning, God created and the heavens and the earth, and see what's being said. So the first bit, in the beginning. Now, if you were to ask people, what does the Bible begin with? How does the Bible start? People would say, well, it begins with the story of creation. And of course, that is true. But in order for the story of creation to take place, God must pre-exist creation. So although creation is the first kind of activity we see documented in the biblical narrative in Genesis, actually in order to get to the point of creation, God must have already been in existence. We can say that much. And of course, it's in our nature as kind of self-centered human beings who see things from our perspective, like the blind men and the elephant, to make things more about us than it really is. So, of course, we get through the Genesis account, and at the end of the story, Adam and Eve are created, and they're effectively the pinnacle of God's creation. It's only once they're created that God declares his creation to be very good, or all other days it ends with it just being good. Good in a much better sense than we use the word good these days. So God existed before the beginning, and And so really, the story of creation it's not about us, it's about God. And because God existed outside and before his creation, we can say that God is not sustained by anything other than himself. And this is a theme picked up at different points throughout the Bible, but one of the most notable, and that you're probably familiar with, is in Exodus chapter 3, where God tells Moses that he wants Moses to go and tell the Israelites that he's going to lead them out of captivity in Egypt. I'll just read a few verses from Genesis chapter 3. It's starting at verse... let's go from verse 10. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? He said, but I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you, that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. Then Moses said to God, if I come to the people of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. So God is I am. He is the self-existent one. He was not created. He exists eternally and infinitely. He is an inexhaustible source of energy and of life. God is unchanging. Now, in Christian theology, we have this concept of God as an unchanging, perfect unity, a perfect being. And we also have the doctrine of simplicity, which states that God is not composed of component parts like we are. He doesn't kind of fluctuate. He's not more loving one day and more powerful the next day, as we might be, kind of different in temperament from one day to the next. His essence is equal to each of his attributes, and each of his attributes is equal to every other attribute. And if you want to explore that a bit further, I'd recommend this book, Simply God by Peter Sandlin. You can borrow my copy if you like it. But this gives us a picture of God as an unchangeable, perfect being. He's not, his character, his nature is not fluctuating as ours might be. So the verse, God is the same today, yesterday, and forever. And people might argue that affirming that God just is, God stating I am, is a statement that God just exists. That it's a circular argument where in order for something to be true, you just have to accept that that's the reality. So why believe in a God at all? Why believe that creation is the work of God at all? Well, I think there's quite a lot of evidence to suggest that that there is a God behind creation, whether you believe in the God of the Bible or not. Most human beings throughout all of history have worshipped something, whether it's a God of some form, whether it's ourselves, and particularly that's prevalent in our modern day culture of Instagram selfies and the like. We are more self-absorbed and self-obsessed than we perhaps ever have been. Other people will worship a created thing, the world, or something in nature, or even just some part of their life like work or family. And at the same time, everyone acknowledges some kind of ethical or moral framework. So you'd be hard pressed to find someone who didn't agree that some things were good and some things were bad. And as much as atheists might argue that those are just relative frameworks we've just established for ourselves to make kind of sense of the world in some way, actually the fact that they're so prevalent throughout society, throughout history, throughout different cultures, throughout the globe, suggests to me that there is some kind of echo there of an absolute moral framework, and we will revisit that next week a bit, I think. And there are those who would say that everything's relative, that you can believe in God if you want to, but I don't have to. It's up to me what I make of God. You can't tell me what to believe. Everything's relative, and there is no absolute truth, except those two statements are absolute truths. And so that's the suggestion that there is actually absolute truth, but not that. So, given that humanity in general has always acknowledged some kind of spiritual reality, it seems far easier and more logical to begin this argument about whether God created the world or not from a position of atheistic, there is no God, but from a position of, well, there might be a God, and if so, let's see if we can work out what kind of God he is. In philosophy, there's this idea of truth makers in a statement. So if I was to say, I have a son called Edmund, Edmund, the person Edmund sat there, is the reality which makes that statement true. He is the truth maker for the statement, I have a son called Edmund. And Peter Sandlin, in his very helpful book, says, God must be his own truth maker. Otherwise, he is dependent upon something other than himself, and therefore cannot be God. So, I have a son called Edmund. Edmund's sonship is dependent on me as father. Edmund doesn't exist as my son apart from me being his dad. But God exists in his own right. He is the great I am. He is the self-existent one. Next, God exists beyond the limits of his creation. Now, I'm not very good at spatial awareness, but I can tell you that scientists believe the universe to be 94 billion light years across, and I cannot begin to imagine what that relates to in terms of like everyday life, but it is an absolutely gigantic distance, and God is greater than that. 94 billion light years. It's a long way. God is greater than his creation. He is not restricted by it. He is not contained by it. He exists throughout it, but he also exists beyond it. And in other worldviews, God is often placed within creation. So God might be nature, or there might be multiple gods, and they all kind of exist within the universe. Others deify creation itself, such as in the concept of Mother Earth or Mother Nature. And that's particularly kind of a hot topic at the moment, although no one would say that they were worshipping the earth. There are definitely aspects of this coming through in the kind of environmental crisis kind of discussions, that people make more of the world than we should do, in a sense. And I am absolutely not belittling climate change, and we absolutely should take care of the creation that God has established, but that's not to say that creation is equal to God or is a God. It is not. Others deify created things, which we've already mentioned, statues, idols, icons, that kind of thing. And of course, that was fairly common practice through the Old Testament. It was quite a few people worshipping idols of one kind or another, even in the Bible. But we know that the reality is different. God existed before anything was created. And in accepting the reality of Creator God, it gives us a correct perspective on our own existence, that creation is about God, it's not about us. God is not a myth devised by man to satisfy our need for answers. We live within the reality that he has defined. How much easier it is to live within the reality that God has defined, where there is absolute truth, where there is right and wrong, where there is good and bad, and that we don't have to devise our own framework for understanding that. So, in the beginning. Next, and more quickly, God created. So it's God who created the universe. It didn't happen by accident. It wasn't chance. It was an intentional act by a personal, loving Heavenly Father. And God creates from nothing. You might have heard the Latin phrase ex nihilo, which means from nothing, or in Hebrew the word is bara. My Hebrew's not very good. Someone could probably pronounce that better for me. But yeah, that word bara is only associated with God in the context of creation in the Bible. Even when other people are said to have made something, to have created something, there's the idea of having created from nothing held within that word bara, which appears multiple times in Genesis. And God creates by his word. He speaks things into being, which is interesting. I'll leave that there. But God's word creates reality. He defines reality by his word, whether that's physical reality, God said, let there be light, and there was light, or whether it's moral, ethical reality. God defines things by speaking them into existence. And God's creation still responds to his word. So you'll know the story of Jesus and the disciples when they go out in the boat on the lake at night, and then Jesus falls asleep and there's a massive storm blows up. And the disciples are absolutely terrified. They think they're going to drown. They can't believe that Jesus is asleep in the bottom of the boat, and they wake him up and he commands the storm, stop, be still, and the storm obeys his voice. So creation still responds to God's voice. And also, at the same time, God creates as community. And again, we'll follow this up in future weeks, that although God is spoken of as a singular being in creation, in the passage from Genesis that Jonathan read, the Spirit of God hovers over the water. And later on in the Bible, we get an insight into Jesus's role in creation. We've been reading at home Hebrews recently, and it begins with this passage. Long ago, at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things, through whom also he created the world. He is the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his nature, and he upholds the universe by the word of his power. So God the Father directs creation. But if we're to understand what's being written here by the writer to the Hebrews, Jesus is the kind of the conduit for the creative story. He is the one who brought creation about, and he is the one who upholds the universe by the word of his power. So Jesus, God's Son, is involved in the creation of the world and in its sustaining. So what can we say about God created? Well, this is God's creation. He made it. It belongs to him. And so we are subject to his will. And we may not like that. People don't like the idea that there is a God who is other than them, who is imposing his will on his creation. And yet, that is the situation in which we find ourselves. This is God's creation. It's not our creation, and nor did it happen by accident. And only a biblical view of creation can answer the question, what is the meaning of life? Because no other worldview frames creation in such a way, particularly our kind of modern secular creation stories of the Big Bang or some other kind of origin story, if it doesn't involve being created by a personal loving God who seeks a people for himself, then there is no meaning to life. There is no meaning of life. But a Christian worldview that shows that God created the world, he determined to make the universe. He chose to bring humans into existence. He chose to make himself relatable and to communicate something of himself to them through his creation, but also through his word, and also just in the way that we operate within community. We reflect something of God's character and God's nature just as we go about our daily lives. And all of this paints such a much more beautiful picture of creation and the whole kind of point of being here. He chose to bring us into existence that we might glorify him and enjoy him forever. And finally, the heavens and the earth. God creates everything. So the Bible will often use the phrase the heavens and the earth to mean everything that exists. And we see that in this verse, in verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. He makes everything. And he makes things that are able to self-replicate. So we see seeds and trees and plants that have seeds within them, able to replicate themselves. But God created the method of replication. It was not an accident. He created seeds which have in them the genetic code required to produce more plants. He created animals and humans who have equally mind-boggling ways of making more of ourselves. But those things are not accidental. They are established by God in creation. He chose to create humans and animals and plants which self-replicate. It's not by accident. God created the heavens and the earth, and all of life is sustained by God. He's not distant from his creation. He didn't just create the universe and kind of toss it into a corner somewhere and just see what happens. He is actively involved within his creation, and he sustains us and gives us every breath. And God creates beauty and diversity and complexity within creation, from sunsets to starfish, from solar systems to subatomic particles, to complex ecosystems with millions of moving parts, as it were, who are all dependent on each other. God established all of this in creation. And God provided natural resources which support our lives. So ultimately, creation is about God. God is self-existent. He pre-exists creation. He created everything, therefore he knows everything, and nothing is beyond his reach. The universe is 94 billion light years across, but God is greater than that. And as creator God, he is also owner. We exist within the reality that he has established. So it's not for us to define or redefine what is true. There are absolute truths. So why would we not then seek God? Why would we not take him at his word and worship him? Well, as the story of Genesis unfolds, we see Adam and Eve sinning against God and choosing to go their own way. And unfortunately, we're still suffering the effects of that to this day, and it will not be resolved until Jesus comes again. Humans have in them a selfish and self-centered nature, and because of that, we have retold the story of creation in a way that makes us feel better about rejecting the God who made us and whose image we bear. But that doesn't mean it's true. I'm going to read Psalm 24, which is kind of David's reflection on creation and on God as creator. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and those who dwell therein, for he has founded it upon the seas and established it upon the rivers. Who shall ascend the hill of the Lord, and who shall stand in his holy place? He who has clean hands and a pure heart, who does not lift up his soul to what is false, and does not swear deceitfully. He will receive blessings from the Lord, and righteousness from the God of his salvation. Such is the generation of those who seek him, who seek the face of the God of Jacob. Lift up your heads, O gates, and be lifted up, O ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. Who is this King of glory? The Lord, strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. Lift up your heads, O gates, and lift them up, O ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. Who is this King of glory? The Lord of hosts. He is the King of glory. There's much we cannot understand about God. That is true. Or about the universe that he has made. It will forever be a mystery. But the Christian worldview, built upon this foundational truth from the very first verse in the Bible, answers both our deepest questions, what is the meaning of life, and provides a solid foundation from which to build our lives and enjoy all that God has made. So I'd like to challenge you this week to keep in mind this verse, Genesis 1 verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Father, we thank you that you are not an impersonal, distant force, but you are Creator God. That you brought into being the universe and everything in it, and that you gave us life. Help us to keep these things in mind. Help us to stand firm on the truth of your word and the reality that you have established. We give you thanks and praise for all the good things we enjoy as part of your creation. I pray that you would help us to turn these things back into prayers of praise and thankfulness to you, and that you would inspire us to share our faith and our convictions with other people who don't know you. When we see something beautiful in creation, it would remind us that you are a loving God. That you sustain us and give us every breath. And that despite our sinfulness and our waywardness, you have made a way for us to be united with you through faith in your Son, Jesus. And for that we give you thanks and praise. Amen.